Penny?
Okay. Mr. Smith?
Present.
Dr. Smith. Dr. McBride?
Here.
Dr. Garza? He said
Here.
he was here. Dr. Khan?
Here.
Dr. Hubner?
Here.
Reverend Duval? You didn't say him, so,
Let me text him.
okay. Right now he's a no.
I don't see him on the list. Let me check the attendees and make sure he's not in there.
Thank you.
I do not see him in attendees, and I sent a reminder this morning at 8:30.
Okay. All right. Well, we do have a quorum, so why don't we go ahead and get started by, we have a lot to cover today, and we're excited to hear the update on the operational review. First, let's go ahead and approve the January meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes that I trust everyone has had a chance to review?
Hopefully.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All right.
I don't know who seconded it.
Simply Craig.
I think that was Chuck, yeah.
Thank you.
All right. I think we need a roll call on this.
No.
Oh, okay, we don't. I apologize. All those in favor of approving the January meeting minutes, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. Okay, the January meeting minutes are approved. So without further ado, Scott, do you want to introduce the team who will be presenting to us today?
So, Carl, thanks for coming. We have Carl Becker with the CGL. They're conducting the operational review here, and there also is someone else joining virtually.
Gary Moore.
Gary Moore. They were here and interviewed, I believe, almost 150 employees, and so they're here just to give a preliminary report on the culture of the jail and recommendations that they have in that regard, and they're still continuing to do more work.
Thanks, Scott. As Scott mentioned, this is a work in progress. This is basically an update of what we've done so far, some of our preliminary impressions. We've spent quite a bit of time at the jail, so we have a pretty good sense where the project's going. This is where we stand at the current time. And this is not advancing.
Try the mouse, maybe.
Okay, mouse does it. Okay. So, just a little bit of background. The scope of this project, as you're aware, was to review and analyze Justice Center operations and to provide recommendations for improvements, changes to improve performance, basically to attempt to bring operations in line with best practices that we see around the country. Our firm does a lot of these types of operational assessments for jails and prison systems around the country. Gary Moore, my associate on this project, who's going to be speaking to you shortly, is a former president of the American Correctional Association, former director of the Ohio Department of Corrections, who's been in more jails and prisons than I can even imagine. So we've seen a lot of how jails operate, what works and what doesn't work, and what we try to do is bring those lessons to bear here in this project. So our methodology, in order to get a full understanding of the jail, we approach this from a number of different dimensions. We viewed documents and data, and we're fortunate in the respect that the jail is a data-rich environment. You do have a lot of reports, a lot of documentation of how things operate here. There's been a lot of studies of the jail in the past, as you're all aware. So you have a lot of documentation in terms of what's going on here and how you perform, and that's been invaluable in helping us develop an understanding of the operations. As Scott mentioned, we spent quite a bit of time here at the jail on all the floors, all the units, all shifts, We spent a couple days in healthcare. So basically observing how the facility operates and seeing how the flow goes and what the conditions are during normal operations. We reviewed literally every facility administrator, spent a fair amount of time with them getting their impressions on issues at the jail. We interviewed a large number of officers and conducted staff focus groups, and as Scott indicated, I think we touched over 150 of the staff over the course of our review. So we think we've got a fairly good, comprehensive understanding of the issues you're all facing here. I can control my mouse here. Okay, so these are initial findings, and I think it's important to start with the fact that we saw a number of operational strengths at the Justice Center. There's been a lot of focus on the problems of the facility, and the problems are very real, but we think it's important to start with an understanding that you do have some very good things going on here, and certainly relative to a number of jails around the country, conditions are not that bad here. Gary, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I thank you. I came to the facility probably thinking the worst. Usually when I get called in to do cultural assessments, there are significant presenting issues. And certainly there are challenges here, and I appreciated the fact that I did provide a 37-slide PowerPoint slide report to Director Scott, and had the opportunity to spend an hour and a half debriefing on at least the initial findings of this. But when we walked in, and let me just, in 2 days, just the cultural assessment piece, 2 of us spent 10 to 12 hours inside each day, walked every floor, had 5 focus groups that consisted of executive staff, of the command staff, of the middle managers, first shift and second shift officers, as well as just walking and talking. And we found a very clean facility. We found an orderly facility. And one of the most critical elements, as you guys know, in terms of do staff and the residents of the jail, do they feel safe? And we've overwhelmingly asked that question and got an affirmative response to that as well. So, and let me just say this, the first floor, and the cultural assessments, I've been involved with these since the inception by the National Institute of Corrections for 20 years. And your first floor at that facility had one of the finest cultures I've seen. And it was distinctly different than the other floors, but would just say that in analyzing that, all the staff were well-trained, all the staff were cross-trained, and it was a stable group of employees that worked there, and it was a wonderful experience to spend a lot of time on the first floor. And just would also say the positive thing, and this is extraordinarily positive, we, in the focus groups that lasted about an hour and a half each, we utilized an instrument that was developed by Cameron and Quinn in the 1980s, organizational culture of major organizations, adapted it to jails and prisons, and then had a very robust discussion. And what we found was that every group of employees, whether it was executive staff or second shift correctional officers, all of 5 groups that we talked with have a significant interest in being more engaged in the jail, more engaged in the policies that are involved there, want to enhance teamwork. So the direction of the culture was very consistent throughout the facility.
So that seems positive. You alluded to the first floor being distinct from other floors. Can you flesh that out a bit?
Well, I can say, let me just say, we did do an analysis of that to a degree, and what we found, the first floor is unique, not just in its operations. I mean, it doesn't supervise a residential population and handles, intake and in the transportation unit and all of those processes. but that unit, everyone on that floor was cross-trained. Everyone not just knew their job, but they knew everyone else's job. So if someone wasn't there, the function continued. The people openly were engaged in talking with each other. And again, it was a consistent staff. There was not a lot of change between the floors. And if you look at the other residential floors, there's a process, kind of an officer assignment process that takes place where the staff is not always consistent. The line staff is not always consistent from floor to floor. They don't have, because of that lack of consistency, they don't build up, the relationship, the team relationship that you would have in a consistent organization. But also, let me just say this: the other floors were relatively consistent with what I see around the country in terms of culture. It was not overwhelmingly negative at all. It was just that the first floor was exceptionally positive.
Okay, thank you.
So I think we can move to the next. So the methodology that was talked about, and this is a process that has been in existence for 20 years. And Carl was actually with me as on the development team. I didn't know that till I visited with him in St. Louis. But this process is focused on identifying themes and opportunities based on staff dialogue. And we did, my calculation, we spoke with 145 staff in 2 days, in depth. Some of those were hour-and-a-half interviews in focus groups. And we looked for consistent themes and opportunities that we could provide to the director. And we're going to go through some of these things, and starts with the challenges. There is an issue with lines of communication. And if you think about it, it's really pretty natural if you think about it, in that you have had an exceptional turnover in leadership at the top end. I believe there have been at least 5 directors in the last 5 or 6 years. And I may be wrong on that number, but
No, you're right.
think that, okay. And this is my 48th year in this work. And I do know when those kinds of things, that kind of turnover occurs in leadership, the staff, and I've experienced this coming in, the staff say, well, I'll just wait out the new director. I'm going to outlast the new director because there's so much turnover. And because of that, that turnover, the director, it's critical that the director has a solid line of communication and working relationship with the next layer down, because the next layer down is a very senior group. Your command staff has multiple years and almost exclusively at that jail. So putting the executive director and having an effective way of communication, and we'll talk about that in a minute, with that command staff, and then expecting the command staff to carry that same message in weekly meetings. And again, we'll talk about that. So the chain of command and line of communication really has been, I think, predictably challenged based on the leadership turnover you have there. And let me just say this. Some of the previous leadership has left a significant mark on your workforce. Some of the previous leadership has provided some direction, I think, to staff and to some of the top staff that was somewhat unpredictable and inconsistent. So as Director Scott's coming in, he's having to deal with the past, because of that's the perception of the workforce. So I think stabilizing the chain of leadership, or the leadership, and then working on some of the other things we'll be talking about, I'm very optimistic. So, and let me just say this too, folks. COVID has changed everything. You've had a lockdown at the facility. In fact, you have a number of and a challenge that that the leadership's going to have. I understand we've lost our communication link. I don't know about the others.
I'm still hearing him.
Okay. I'm gonna continue until someone tells me to stop at this point. I understand we are having some communication issues, but the COVID has significantly changed things, and one of the challenges that is going to take place at this facility is
Gary,
going
can
to be.
you hold on 1 second? The conference room, they've lost audio to you.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I'm going to work on it. Hold on.
I see the conference room now. Still no audio from me in the conference room.
Can you guys hear us now?
I can.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
See if we can restore the presentation and still maintain the audio.
I don't know what.
You were just getting ready to make a key point, Gary, and we lost you. We were on the edge of our seats.
I'll bet you were. It looks like a good group there. I feel terrible about the issue here, but so I was talking, I guess, about COVID changing everything. And I think one of the challenges to the board, and certainly to the director, will be you've hired a number of people based on working on the benefits and pay, et cetera. You've hired a number of people that have never operated a jail in an operational setting away from COVID. So that will clearly be a challenge, both in terms of training and in terms of supervision as you're moving forward. And I know, Carl, you have talked, that you have looked at a number of policies that the directors ask us to, and I think there is an ongoing need to continue to review policies, and I've got a recommendation for that at the end here. But and a great example that I just saw, Director, was your policy on dress code that I think is appropriate for review and refinement. Carl, I don't know if you wanted to talk about any other policy issues before we move on to the next slide.
We're looking at use of force, segregation placement, incident reporting, incident response. So some of those critical types of policies, they've been in place for quite some time. Circumstances change, professional practices change, standards change, and really you just need to make sure that what those policies represent is consistent with what best practices are currently. So, and how they apply this facility specifically. So, and we stand ready to help you do that in terms of bringing our expertise and our view in terms of what might work best for the facility. Right.
Yeah, thank you. So we'll move on. So here's the challenge that we now have is let's identify some opportunities that we think can enhance the culture. Let me just say this too. When we talk about culture, let me be simplistic. When we developed this process 20 years ago at the National Institute of Corrections, we defined culture as how people feel about coming to work. And the process is how they feel today and how they would like to feel, because what we know is that none of the creative innovations and new initiatives will last in a workforce that's not happy about coming to work. So the challenge and the overriding purpose of a cultural assessment is take a snapshot of the issues and the opportunities, and then provide some suggestions to mend those opportunities forward. And I've mentioned this before, but all 5 focus groups are really calling for, both in their comments and in the assessment instruments that we did, for more teamwork, more staff recognition, more involvement in the operation by the facility. And the neat thing is that you do have a structure for unit management, each floor a unit, and leadership staff assigned to each of those units, which is a significant benefit in terms of implementing these kinds of changes and decentralizing some of the thought here. And let me just also say this. I've learned this at 48 years, a person makes a number of mistakes, right? And those are the greatest learning opportunities. A director, a head, a chief, CEO cannot order and cannot edict a good, positive culture. That has to be developed by the staff under the leadership of the director. And that requires engagement and involvement of the staff so they fully understand their expectations and policies, and quite frankly, have had some input into that. Let's go on to the communications piece. So these are some specific recommendations that we have to address the cultural opportunities. Leadership, regular executive team meetings, executive staff and command staff. Now, it's more than just getting together in the room. I think these meetings, it's going to be imperative that there is discussion and dialogue. And as we talked about some of the policy issues that we have in front of us, that's a great subject to have, but with an expectation that everyone at the table contributes and is involved and is engaged. And that message that comes from that executive meeting with the command staff, then permeates down to the units, to everyone, and it's consistent. And you do that again with weekly meetings, floor meetings, with the unit managers and the staff that work all 3 shifts. And I think it's also imperative that the leadership team gets out and walks the units to confirm that the information that was discussed by the executive and command staff is heard and understood consistently by all of the staff on all of the floors. So we think that communication can be very, very effective. And I know in some ways it may seem corny, but a newsletter that's prepared by staff, not necessarily by the executive staff, but by staff under the direction and leadership of the director, some sort of ongoing newsletter that carries a positive message and information can also be important as well. So I think communication and communication is a pretty standard cultural opportunity that I've seen around the country in terms of jails and prisons. We can go to the next one and stop me any time, folks. I'm pretty informal.
I have a question.
Yes, sir. Sure.
And there may be board members with questions after me, so I want to leave them some space as well. But my first question is, did you perceive a difference in the evaluation of the facility between people that you talk to in focus groups versus people that you talk to in individual interviews?
No, that's a great question, and that's a litmus test of the process, quite frankly. I worked with the facility administrative team to ensure that we had random selection of, and each focus group was kind of a homogeneous group in terms of first shift, second shift, middle man staff, executive staff were the 5. But within those, we ensured that we selected randomly every 8th person or every on the roster. So we first of all ensured that we did have a random group, and no, it was. But there are 3 ways to confirm. First one is what was verbally talked about in the focus groups, compared with the instruments, and I gave a pretty lengthy description of the instruments and the four cultures that the instruments identify to the director during that hour and a half presentation, and so those are there. And then finally, meeting floor by floor, walking independently floor by floor, and we found that the comments were very much aligned. Now, you're going to have one-offs and certain individuals that have had experiences that may be very personal to them that we've heard, but those were not consistent, and those were very isolated. So I feel that, and I made the comment to the director, I staked my 48 years of professional work in this area on the fact that the cultural assessment may not be exactly accurate, but I guarantee that it reflects what the workforce feels and how they would like to feel. So
can I see if other board members have questions?
Yeah. This is your meeting. I'm here to support you.
Okay. I think we're at maybe a little bit of a natural place where some others might. I have 1 or 2 more, but I want to hear from Alex or Beth or Tim or any of the board members. Okay, one other follow-up before you move on. Did you perceive the existence of factions within the facility? And if so, do you have any specific recommendations other than the kind of broad ones that you just laid out to bring people together?
Yeah, I think one of the significant differences in kind of the way people perceive and feel about the facility are those new employees compared to those employees that have been in the facility for quite some time. Quite frankly, some of the longtime employees, while appreciative of the recent efforts that you've made to improve salaries and benefits, there's a sense that they've worked through the tough times, and the new employees coming on are reaping the benefits of that. And in other words, the compensation between having worked there for years compared to new employees is very small. And I think that is a defining factor in some groups. So we did get that.
Okay.
And I think that was probably the most significant difference. The rest, and let me just say this too, and that was emphasized, and I didn't get into the details of the instrument and its findings because it would take a long time, and it's probably 700 miles between here and St. Louis, and I'm not sure that would translate very well. But first shift officers had a much more significant calling in their comments and in their instruments for change from the structure to a more teamwork oriented. And I know this is not a good word in St. Louis, but it's the family culture as defined by Cameron and Quinn. So, and I'm just looking at some previous numbers here, but first shift had a significant urge to move to diminish the kind of chain of command structure that is typically found in jails, which is kind of the hierarchical culture, move to a more family-oriented, teamwork, collaborative kind of environment. Compared to second shift, which consists mostly of the newer employees, they really didn't have a feel. They looked at the culture as it exists today and did not have a significant sense of urgency to change the culture. So first shift and second shift looked at the facility differently. First shift having a greater sense of wanting to change and move to a more collaborative, teamwork, communicative environment. And second shift looked at both their comments and the assessment of the instrument. They really didn't call for much of a change. So first and second shift looked at things significantly different.
And you think some of that overlays with the difference between newer staff and staff that have been here for some period of time?
I do. And I think that reinforces that first belief, Carl.
So, I mean, just kind of speaking off the top of my head here, you know, so it sounds like given that divide and given the more optimistic outlook that newer employees seem to have and kind of this different orientation, one maybe small thing that could be done would be to try to, you know, maybe recognize every time someone had like a 5-year anniversary in their years of service, you know, some type of mechanism to show appreciation for that.
We do that.
Well, okay, you guys already do that. Okay, sorry.
That's okay.
But
I mean, I'm just thinking of ways to show appreciation for the longer serving people who may not be feeling the positivity of some of the newer workers.
I think that, and I don't want to get into my last slide or last couple slides yet, but I'll be moving pretty quick. I promise.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No. But a director can't just order that. Those are the kind of is an important element to have a collaborative group of employees. What is important to them. So much like I've talked to Carl about like the dress code policy and these things, getting staff engaged and input with the director always having the final say and always defining the barrier or the boundaries is a very effective way of getting to that, because you're right. I mean, the more we can recognize staff, the better. And there is a staff recognition program, there's no question, but it would not hurt, I think, to have a focus group of a diverse group of staff, some new staff and some older staff that have some gray hair like me, to just engage and say, well, what do you think makes it, what would you like to see? And by doing that, you start building a collaborative, you start moving into that family culture, and then you also start really getting some feedback in the facility. And so I highly recommend that in almost all of these areas. And if we were to go to the next slide, I'll just continue the theme here. Training was a big deal. Training was significantly an issue in terms of that. And think about this just a minute. Once people leave the classroom, and I did set in for about 45 minutes on one of the classroom presentations, which was very effective and got staff involved. It was hands-on. And I can only speak to that 45 minutes, but I thought it was well done. But when staff leave, the new staff leave the classroom training and go to their on-the-job training process, what we heard from the staff and what we saw is we had field FTIs, I'm used to calling field training officers, but FTIs in this case, often did not have a lot more seniority than did the new employees. And in reality, in a jail and prison setting, the on-the-job training with a coach and mentor is really the most significant training that can be done. So I strongly suggest that the FTI program be evaluated, look at who is in those positions. I don't know whether Carl's going to get into it, but potentially looking at the role of maybe a sergeant, and I think the director has some thoughts on this as well, having that role specifically to direct and mentor and coach new employees, because there is clearly a void there, particularly I think on second shift where a lot of the new employees are going. And I think this is another opportunity to just gather, take a look at the staff that have been hired in the last 12 months, and bring them into a group room and say, okay, what did you feel you were not prepared to do when you took your job, and how can we address that? And I think from that engagement of staff in this kind of focus group will help continue to build the culture because they're involved, but also you're going to get some tremendous feedback as you develop your FTI program. And then finally, supervisory training is critical. So you have coaches, but you also have your lieutenants, your supervisors. Think about this, and I just spoke to a group of leaders about this. Think about this environment. If every single employee at the St. Louis County Jail, every single employee had a supervisor that knew them as an employee and knew them as a person and knew something about their family situation or their interest, whatever, and engage them on that level. What a wonderful environment that would be, and what a great asset in terms of retention that would be. People leave people, and in terms of separations, and there are very, very few supervisory training programs that emphasize that, and I suggest that a supervisory training program that deals with values as well as competencies could be a tremendous benefit to the St. Louis County Jail.
One other area, when we're talking about training, which is going to be critical as the facility slowly comes off lockdown and gets back to normal operations, you got a significant cohort of staff who've really never worked in a direct supervision environment and don't understand direct supervision and how to make that work and how effective that can be. So they have no experience with that. So some training in terms of understanding the philosophy of direct supervision and how it can be made to work is absolutely critical for many of your newer staff. And again, the timing for that is pretty critical as you want to get back to a more normal operating environment here.
Carl, let me build on that. Actually, the 45-minute session that I sat in on new employee classroom training was on direct supervision. But the reality is that direct supervision, to do it effectively, there needs to be on-site coaching where staff and the residents interact. And so the OJT part of that is going to be critical, and I think it is. I think ensuring that staff feel comfortable and safe and understand appropriate communication with the residents and response is going to be critical. And I think there are probably staff, as Carl said, that have never experienced that, and that needs to be a real priority.
And you lived that back in the day when
the
facility was open, then all the staff had to undergo that.
So we came in, that's how we opened it, so we went to other facilities to learn the principles. We went to ACA, NIC, we visited different jails and built those philosophies. I think what has happened is, staff shortages, pay freezes, and losing people, not being able to get the training that's needed to develop new officers, and COVID on top of that in the last couple of years. That philosophy is probably not being fully engaged because of that, and we're doing things a little different with two people in the pod.
Yeah.
Okay, so training is a big one. Policy and procedures consistently came up in the focus groups. There's a belief throughout the facility that policies and procedures are not consistently applied from shift to shift, or maybe from floor to another floor, and that, and again, this is one of those issues that I'm not sure how accurate that is, but I know that staff feel it. We can say that, and just a couple of policies that did rise to that level of people talking about it. The attendance policy, and that's a tough one, isn't it? As you have had challenges getting staff and staffing your posts and trying to avoid mandatory overtime and all of those things, attendance is one of those challenges that the administrators and supervisors, it's a tough thing, and it's a tough thing to regulate consistently. So attendance, and then I also mentioned dress code, and I had a chance to look at the dress code policy that was that was voiced, that people would talk about. Well, look at this. This is what the policy says, and take a look around. So consistency with policy and procedure. So I've got two thoughts on that. One, this is a ripe topic to deal with in that executive team meeting, with the director going around to everyone in the room saying, okay, what are the policies that you are having difficulty with and you are hearing that either don't make sense or are difficult to apply consistently, to identify those and have a discussion about, okay, how are we going to handle this? So if, for example, if it's the attendance policy and we're setting in a group of command staff and executive staff and everyone's in the room, they may not all agree, but when they walk out and say, okay, this is the policy and this is how we're going to apply it. And so there is consistency, because this is one, and this is not foreign to or unique to St. Louis County Jail. This is a consistent problem around this country, that from shift to shift and supervisors making different decisions. And it's great to empower supervisors to make that, but they need to make it within a framework that the leadership believes is accurate. So, and then I think the other thing is when leadership identifies some policies that need to be refined, it's great to bring a small, diverse group of staff in to say, okay. And I think the dress code policy is a great example of bringing staff together and the direct. Okay, I'm chartering this group. These are your boundaries. We're not going to. These are things that are absolute that we're not going to tolerate. But within that framework, within those boundaries, help us identify and walk through this policy and look at prepare some recommendations for us to consider. Leadership's still going to make the decision. We're not getting rid of any responsibility here, but we're gaining input on a policy that is directly affecting the staff. So again, and I think that enhances the culture. Director, I looked at your dress code policy, and I finally had a tough time with making some recommendations. So I finally got a hold of Carl and said, Carl, I said, I'm sitting here in the middle of Ohio, and I really don't feel comfortable making dress code policies for St. Louis County, and it was not easy, and it was certainly different than what I would have in Ohio. But I think having the flavor of a diverse staff involved makes a lot of sense.
I think, Gary, one of the things that I think happens with that is if you've been here for a long time and you're accustomed to the policy as it was for the past 20 years, that newer people coming in and the newer generation coming in, younger, there are differences. And so an example of this is when I started, people couldn't have tattoos. Now most people have tattoos. Yeah. So there are some differences, and that's where we can use your help in helping people understand the need for those changes.
Yeah, I think there is. I think if you anchor your decision on dress code and grooming, et cetera, to security, like self-contained breathing apparatus, you have to have a proper fit, et cetera, then that makes a much stronger case for dress code as opposed to, and I had a tough time with hair color, to be honest. And as kind of 48 years, you'd think I'm an awful conservative guy, but I wondered how a blue streak in the hair would really impact security, and I wasn't sure that I could really see that. But so I think having local input as well would be helpful. Two more things that I have, and then I'll relinquish this. And I appreciate your endurance with me talking all this time. Credibility in the promotional process. This was voiced throughout all of the focus group. There was just the word favoritism was used as the promotional process was discussed. Now, we did not see specific examples. Of course, we were only here 2 days, but we heard that staff did not have, I guess the issue is staff just did not have confidence in the promotional process. One of the things that I'll share with you that I did share with the director that I think is a very, very, very difficult thing to do, but a huge, it can make a huge difference, is that when there's an interview panel and 3 or 4 people are not selected, I think it is important to call those 3 or 4 people in and talk about who was selected and why they were not, and what they can do in the future to move forward. It is a when you go to do that, you're not looking for a good day, because it's a tough thing. But here's the cultural importance of that. If there are 4 or 5 people being interviewed and only one person gets the position, the other 3 or 4 people that didn't get the position, they have people in the facility that are aligned with them, that have a relationship with them, that believe that they should have gotten the job. And if the only thing we're doing is promoting someone and in silence to those that didn't get it, then we're actually energizing the discussion about why that person got it and the unfairness of it. So I believe a very difficult thing, but an important thing for the culture, is to develop a practice where, for promotional opportunities, people that are not selected have an opportunity to meet with the director and talk about their future, and talk about why this was, why they were not selected, and who was and why. And the old principle here, and I believe this so much, is that at different times, under different circumstances, different people will be promoted. People that have competencies and values for a certain time. So not every time, each promotional opportunity is a bit different given the circumstances. So if you frame the kind of qualities and values and competencies you're looking for at the beginning of that process, then it becomes much more objective in terms of the selection process. And then as you disclose to those that didn't get it, it becomes a little more descriptive. So I think that would be my recommendation. And again, I think that it would be an interesting thing to bring together a number of individuals to just talk about that, and to flesh out why they think there is favoritism in the promotional process. We just did not have time to flesh that out, but I think that would be important information for the director to have.
So I appreciate your look at the promotional process and digging into kind of people's concerns about it. What about the discipline process, or like investigations? Did you hear anything about people's confidence or lack thereof in that process?
Yeah, well, that we did. It's interesting. It really came out more not from the investigative process, and I am aware of some key investigations that you guys are looking at, and that the director is honed in on. It was really more the consistency in how a person, individual, was handled, more so than the investigative process.
Okay.
But yeah, those issues came up, and I do think that the director is appropriately honing in on some issues. And let me just say this too about the investigation process. From my experience, when you find a process that is unfair, or where someone has not been addressed that should be addressed, and you have the facts to support it, it's imperative that those issues be addressed, and almost be addressed visibly. And I remember on use of force at one prison, I became a warden at a prison, highest use of force rating rates of anyone in Ohio. and on a Saturday morning, I was in walking around, and a lieutenant asked me to go to segregation to talk to an inmate who had been beaten up badly, horribly. And they did, and the lieutenant said, Warden, I think there's some problem with this. All the reports look good, no problems. And it was an assault. It was a use of force in the yard on the pavement, taking him to segregation. None of the staff had any issues with the report, but I was able to interview inmates that in reception didn't have the opportunity to talk with each other, but all of the inmate statements that we were able to collect verified the fact, told the same story. And even in the unionized state, AFSCME represents the employees there. I was able to fire that person based solely on statements from inmates without a collaborating statement from staff. And I personally testified at an arbitration hearing and called the person a cowboy. And that's not, we're not going to tolerate. And what happened then was the use of force rate at that facility dropped dramatically. So it's one of those zero tolerance issues, right? You know, we're gonna handle use of force properly, and we're not going to deviate from that. We have zero tolerance for that. So, I'm sorry for embellishing all of that, but these topics are pretty darn important. The last thing I want to say is this, and I mean this, folks. I want you to hear this, and you don't know me. I walked in expecting a very troubled facility, and I know that there have been articles written and describe this as a troubled facility. And this facility has challenges, and we've talked about some of those challenges today, but it also has a good story to tell. And I think this is another great opportunity, cultural opportunity. And I wouldn't have some top administrator writing all this stuff up, but I would get a group of employees that would be willing to be a communications team to at least start to develop stories that could be polished up by the designated person that would talk about the good things being done here, the benevolent processes and things that's going on, great stories about your staff of the month, that publish that, pictures. I even like gas cards or something to be given to them. But anyway, but to tell those kind of stories, family members that may have won a state meet in golf or track or something, to tell those stories, because I'll tell you, you have a lot of good things to tell. And the image of the facility is much darker than what I saw. And so I really think that this is an opportunity, again, to engage staff, to get them to help promulgate these stories, to build them, and the director to identify someone to kind of polish them up and make sure they're appropriate and help distribute those to media. But you have a story to tell that is far better than what has been written. And that's my 48 years of experience saying that. Carl,
Yeah,
I'm going to turn to you at this point.
A lot of the program initiatives that you guys have been developing and are rolling out this year, that is good stuff. That tells a good story of what you're trying to accomplish here.
Yeah, that's right.
So other areas we took a deep dive into. Staffing, of course, is a critical issue at the facility, has been for quite some time. So we spent some time going through the operations of the units, working with the command staff, getting an understanding of how you staff the facility and what the challenges are. And what we found is that your basic post system is very sound. In other words, the posts you have established to supervise the inmate population and provide the operational workflow through the facility is essentially sound. We didn't see big gaps where a post needed to be established and you don't have one, or that you have too many posts in certain areas. Didn't see that. The basic post system is very sound. Problem, as you all know is that historically, over the last year or so, you haven't had enough staff to fill those posts on a consistent basis. And in fact, many posts are staffed almost entirely with overtime. And excessive reliance on overtime, again, drives a lot of the issues with retaining staff, because you could burn staff out quite easily. And that's a major problem. In terms of developing the staffing plan, your relief factor is clearly inadequate. In other words, you don't have enough relief staff to cover those posts given the normal pattern of staff absences. So that, in essence, results in the reliance on overtime. So it's, one, not having enough staff to fill your current vacancies, but you probably don't have enough positions established to cover staff absences because your relief factors is far too low. So, and the other issue we saw, of course, is the change in policy with housing unit supervision in response to the assault on staff last fall. The posting of 2 officers to the units requires, in essence, substantial additional staff if those units are to operate normally with inmates out in the normal course of operations. Selective reintroduction of direct supervision with 1 staff per unit will reduce staffing requirements. We understand there's good reasons for posting 2 staff to select housing units, certainly maximum security or housing units which have a population which is more difficult. You can certainly make that case. But there are a number of units where direct supervision with 1 staff officer overseeing the unit with support from a floor supervisor, with support from a rover on the floor is adequate to provide security and normal operation. So that is an issue that you're going to face as you get back to more normal operations. And I know you're in the process of getting inmates out more, increasing the amount of out-of-cell time. So this is an issue you're going to have to confront pretty quickly over the next couple of months.
You know, Carl, this might be an opportunity to, and I agree with your recommendation, but to transition, looking at a unit that may have had the fewest issues or fewest problems, and starting it there and building that to a point. And as you said, there would be a unit or 2 that you may want to keep that supervision at least for a while, but to transition maybe unit by unit and incrementally develop that plan.
Great point. Okay, this mouse is no longer working. Here we go. Okay, here we go. Organization. We also looked at basically the table of organization and the command structure, and what we found is that certainly compared to other jails of this size, in terms of the number of inmates you have, the overall number of staff, you have a larger than normal number of senior managers at the major and captain level. And this is something I'm sure has developed over time. The facility population is lower than it used to be, so there may be some relationship to that. But certainly, in terms of the number of inmates you currently supervise, how the facility operates, the number of senior managers is probably in excess of what we would normally find around the country. Another issue we saw is basically no difference in the way that lieutenants and sergeants are utilized and in what their duties are. Sergeants were a new position added by Director Benasco when he was here. In our review of the situation, it doesn't look like there was a lot of thought put into differentiating the roles of lieutenants and sergeants, so basically their current work duties are interchangeable, which creates confusion in the chain of command, communications, confusion on the part of staff. Roster management, Gary touched on this earlier. Each floor basically manages their own roster here, which creates a very complicated situation in how you deploy staff and creates some inconsistencies in how staff are deployed or where staff get assigned. And that's, again, different from what we typically see in most jails where housing staff are basically managed on one roster so that you've got some consistency and some reliability in terms of how those staff report and where their assignments are.
Helps reduce the issue of favoritism or the belief that there's favoritism. One roster management, as opposed to kind of the drafting that that takes place, I think on Tuesdays or whatever, I think, and would allow for a more consistent development of a team on each floor as well.
Yeah, and if that officer knows where he's going to be working that week and next week and the week after that, he can develop those relationships with his coworkers. He knows the inmates in the pod. It's a better working situation as opposed to not knowing where he's going to go, wondering why he's being moved to this floor when he's been working on the other floor. So it creates a much better work environment.
Can I just comment one thing?
Sure.
That's what basically our concept is. You're assigned to a floor, so how is that different from what you guys are saying?
Gary, you want to talk about the draft process? I mean, this is kind of where we see issues.
We've had that said by the officer. That was some of the reasons that some people left, because they were being thrown over different places throughout. By nailing them down to a particular unit, saying this is your floor, you take ownership of it. And a sporadic roster, to me, the way we did it under Benasco, just led to people going on a different supervision, different style, day in, day out, or week in, week out, where they're being assigned to a particular supervisor, to a unit that mentors them, helps them grow, coaches them, rather than going to somebody or going to a floor they're only going to buy in for that day, not take ownership of that particular unit, as opposed to they being assigned to a floor. I just wanted to throw that out there.
No, I think we're talking the same thing. I think it's how you get there. And what we see typically in jails and prisons is you have like a senior roster manager, somebody who's basically responsible for managing that roster and ensuring that you have some consistency in how people are assigned, as opposed to, I mean, here you've got the weekly draft where people are basically trying to, and some of it's a function of just having so many vacancies and so many people not showing up for work. You're pulling people from here to go to there. It's a much more chaotic system in appearance here in terms of how that process unfolds.
Yeah, I can't more strongly recommend a single roster. Roster management is critical. I think it helps the budget as well. But whoever was talking earlier with making those recommendations and talking about consistency and all that did a beautiful job, much better job than I would have done in terms of talking about the importance of consistency of assignment. And then the unit managers on the floors, when they have a vacancy, or they can go to the person managing the roster and say, hey, I need a consistent person here, and that can happen. So the needs can be addressed, but it can be addressed through a single roster. But I really commend whoever, I can't see through my phone here who was talking.
That's Darby. This is Darby. How you doing?
Hey.
So we also took a look at healthcare, had our correctional nurse expert come on site for a few days. We're still working through her report, and she has a number of issues that she's identified, and we're going to go through those in some detail later. But on a preliminary basis, one of the things that jumped out to us is the use of tablets for medical appointments here at the facility, which is pretty progressive. A lot of jails have introduced tablets during COVID to facilitate visitation, program services delivery, but we haven't seen that many instances where you're actually using tablets for medical appointments, telepsychiatry, health education. So that's a very, very notable use of those tablets here at the facility, and something you guys should be commended for. Biggest issue, of course, and you're familiar with this, is the nursing staffing shortfall, which forces you to rely extensively on contract nursing agencies to provide nurse coverage. That's a problem because you don't have the consistency in staffing. You don't have necessarily nurses who are well-versed and well-trained in how to provide services in a correctional environment. So that's an issue, and that's an issue not just specific to St. Louis, but in jails and prisons across the country, nursing staffing shortfalls, and for that matter in hospitals. It's a big issue everywhere right now. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be any real great solutions. We do note that you want to ultimately get the facility healthcare accredited with National Commission on Correctional Healthcare Standards. That is a very important goal. If you can achieve that accreditation, you have really achieved great things in terms of reducing your risk liability. NCCHC is basically the gold standard in terms of correctional health care.
What's stopping us from doing so?
It's a matter of putting in place, one, the policies, two, the reporting mechanisms, achieving the standards. What you do is you put those policies in place, and then after about a year or so, the NCCHC will actually send inspectors out and accredit you in terms of your ability to meet those standards and abide by those standards and operate healthcare in compliance with those standards. And once they are satisfied that you're doing that, they accredit you. And that, again, that provides you a great standard, objective standard for indicating that you're doing exactly what needs to be done in terms of inmate healthcare. And now I know the group here is interested in doing that. They've gone to different facilities that are NCCHC accredited, so I know that is the plan. You've got quite a ways to go, but it's important you start that process now.
Okay. Is Dr. Khan on?
They're going to review everything with him first before it's reviewed with the board.
Okay.
In fact, we just got that meeting set up yesterday.
Great. Okay.
So very preliminary recommendations. We think we need to look at, we're going to provide a recommendation to streamline the management structure in line with the current facility population and staffing. We think probably it makes sense over some period of time to phase out sergeants, because there is really no difference in how sergeants and lieutenants are utilized here, and go back to the former system of lieutenants being the first line supervisor. We think you need to reopen the facility and reintroduce direct supervision on at least select housing units, but most importantly, get that inmate population out of lockdown, moving in the units, and get back to a normal operations that existed prior to COVID. We're going to update the relief factor and provide some indication for you of what your staffing requirements are consistent with your current facility posts and what level of staff you need to cover those posts. And then finally, as Gary talked about, enhanced staff training, and there's a variety of specific recommendations we're going to make to you on the types of staff training and methodologies for providing that training that we think will be effective here. Also, again, kind of a follow-up on our earlier discussion on policies, getting staff involved in identifying current policies that are either not followed consistently or need to be modified to reflect current best practices, make sure they're consistently applied throughout the facility, formal communication network of conveying policy directives and ensuring that policy is conveyed consistently from the director through executive staff to the different floor managers down to staff, so everybody's exactly on the same page in terms of policy and what compliance means. And then, as we just discussed, developing healthcare policies and procedures based on National Commission on Correctional Healthcare Standards. So those are, we're going to have a lot more recommendations, but those are probably some of the highlights. We're going to flesh those out in more detail in our report.
Are there questions from the board?
Jeff,
Yes, Tim.
thank you for the report and the preliminary findings you have, and it seems very thorough. And I agree with some of the comments about how we need to tout the positive aspects, and that's a horse I've been on for probably 3 years now, that there's not enough attention in the press to some of the good things that are being done, and particularly around COVID prevention. And I think there has been significant improvements. My question is going to be about the scope of the review. As I understand it from things that we've seen, that the original RFP was supposed to, and we had actually asked for a look at the inmate deaths over the past 5 years. And I see that that's not going to be done now. So could we address that? Because that disappoints me, because I think we asked for that.
So Tim, since that article went out, the review team is looking at the investigative reports, and that will be something that they can provide later. So that process is happening now. There still is some pending litigation and question about access to medical reports, but they are looking at the investigative.
Yes, we're looking at the investigative reports, and we'll have some commentary on the process that was used to investigate a specific instance.
Okay, well, that's helpful to know. I didn't know when the word investigative reports was used, that included the inmate deaths. So
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that that gets covered because I still don't have a clear answer to what happened.
It will include that, yes.
All right, thank you.
And I think frankly, Tim, none of us have a totally clear answer as to what happened between the time that the first RFP went out and the second RFP went out. So I know that the jail leadership itself did not understand exactly what happened between those two times. So it was something that happened in other offices, other county offices. Some changes were made, which I know disappointed all of us on the board, but I'm glad to see that despite the inability to access the medical reports themselves, all the investigative reports around those incidents are going to be examined.
Yes.
Another component that was struck from the second RFP involved investigations in, disciplinary investigations here. But that was one of the questions that I asked was around confidence in that. And I know that there have been some, conversations between the team and the leadership of the jail to give you access to information you need to, before you produce your final report, look more into that aspect of the jail and provide recommendations on best practices to make sure that we can, continue improving in that department.
Definitely.
Because even if it was not, I heard that it was something that was raised by some people. I think probably in group settings, that's a delicate issue to raise. And so I do think that's something that we would like, I think as a board, we want to know where we've come up short in the past and how we can continue doing better. What other questions are there does that make sense, Gary? Gary's still on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. What other questions from the board?
I just have a quick question. This was a really interesting report. I learned a lot about it. Did you discuss any differences or any needs particular to women or perhaps people of color or in terms of staffing and retention and things like that? That seems to be a key concern as well. So I was wondering if you looked into any subgroups as well.
Gary, did that come up as an issue in any of the?
We were very sensitive to this issue because obviously it's embedded in a healthy or unhealthy culture. It did not rise to the level that it does in most facilities. The issue of gender was more of a concern than race. I know that the director is moving and emphasizing. What we did look into is that there have been a number of female staff promoted recently, and I think that has eased some of that concern because I think traditionally that was seen as a concern. It was a male-dominated. We're in a male-dominated field, and your facility has a significant number of female staff that were not represented as much in the supervisory ranks. Speaking very candidly, Beth, I think one of the latest promotions of the director of a female staff to a management position created some concern among some of the male employees. So and that's healthy. I mean, you know, to address these kind of things, it takes an edge to be able to deal with that. I think we felt that that there was a clear effort to ensure that the female staff there received fair consideration for promotions, and I think at a sense that you know, supervisory staff should reflect the workforce in all ways, right? And should reflect the residents of the facility. I think there is a movement in the right direction there, and I think people are recognizing that, both good and bad in terms of some staff not liking it, but I think it's clearly an important issue to address.
Thank you very much. I have another question, if you don't mind. I don't believe you talked about this, but I could have missed it. Did you talk about, it seems like mostly your report is focused on the staff that work, you know, in custody roles, which is obviously very important. Did you look at like case management or people who work with, you know, reentry and stuff like that? Or will you look at that more?
We handled that staff principally by walking and talking, and we did spend significant time because we did have the focus groups of the first and second shift officers and middle managers, et cetera. So most of our walking and talking, most of the other, I think we had about between 50 and 60 people in specific focus groups, but the rest, totaling up to 145 total folks, most of those were non-uniform staff that you had, and we spent a lot of time and discharge and that whole process, and felt. Let me just say this: they had generally a very positive feeling about the facility.
Jeff, could I jump
Yeah.
in?
Absolutely,
So,
Tim.
yeah, thanks. And I want to piggyback a little bit on what Beth said. You know, there was somewhat thorough interim report, and there was a lot of attention to the correction staff. And I know that the look at the health staff is ongoing. And I would, you know, I think, frankly, we have a pretty strong and diligent health staff. You mentioned the challenges and in terms of short staffing, but some of the things they've been able to do in, you know, even despite those challenges, I'd like to see you comment on that more later. But my other comment is, and it's maybe a little uncomfortable with Scott being in the room, but you know, when you talked a lot about the leadership and the management of the jail, you don't have to address it now, but I'm curious if you're going to talk about, you know, as you say, we've had 5 directors. I think a lot of this call for a report was brought up 2 directors ago when that transition happened. And I'm curious if the report will address sort of the leadership at the top, which I think has frankly been, I'll just comment myself, has been quite strong with the last 2 leaders. So that, you know, you don't, maybe you could talk about whether that'll be in the report or if you want to comment on it now, that's fine.
Well,
I mean, certainly, go ahead, Gary.
Well, I would just say this, and I'm not dancing around the question because I think it's a very pertinent and important question. I agree with your assessment of current leadership compared to some of the past leadership, and that's just my assessment. I don't want to speak for CGL. That's my assessment. But let me just say this: there were some previous directors that that acted in a manner that was pretty inconsistent with traditional leadership. And in some cases, I believe that some of the even management staff was victimized by some of the actions of previous directors. And I say that to say culture is told through stories, right? Staff that repeat stories over and over. And we heard significant stories about, and that were very consistent from different people at different times during the session or during our visit, that were descriptive, consistent, and in my mind, some of the staff were victimized by some of the previous leadership. And again, that's Gary Moore speaking. Carl, I don't mean to speak for CGL on that, but that's my assessment.
Gary's probably more diplomatic than most of us. I mean, the fact of the matter is you're still living with the fallout from the Bonasco regime here. That was an incredibly, from everything we can gather, and actually we've run across Mr. Bonasco and other jurisdictions, incredibly toxic environment, and you're still pulling yourself out of that swamp. And it's going to take a lot of work.
Thank you. You've addressed my comment, and I agree with you. And
I have one more comment, Timothy, if that's okay.
Sure.
I want to just talk about how intense some of the staff's feelings were since we brought up the past director, Bonasco, et cetera. Staff were in tears. Leadership staff at the facility were in tears as they were describing some of the actions and behaviors. That's how intense this is. And quite frankly, culture takes time to address. Those wounds are going to take time to address. And that's why we have emphasized in our report so much emphasis on meetings and communication, almost over meeting and over communicating to compensate for some of that past behavior.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for those questions. Thank you for the presentation, Carl and Gary. We really appreciate you guys giving us this kind of preliminary, this kind of preview of what we're going to see. I think you've gotten a little bit of guidance from us about some things that we want to make sure are examined, in some depth in the final report. And if you should need to get in touch with any of us between now and then just let us know.
Very good.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Good to meet you.
Thank you. Good to meet you.
Where can I find Ray so I can get my thumb to?
Here, I'll take you.
Oh, is it in the background? Can you
It's
also
actually
email
behind the
us?
TV.
Can you also email us a copy of that?
Sure, absolutely. We'll talk, Scott. Oh, okay.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks, Gary.
Good night, right? Thank you.
All right. Why don't we get back to the agenda here and talk about some of the recent, I guess as kind of a segue, one of the things that was that came out of the preview was the need to be more public about some of the positive programs that are being implemented here. So let's give you a chance to do that.
Great. So we have a group coming in starting in May to conduct voter registration, and a commitment from the county election board to have on-site voting instead of absentee voting where it would be mailed in. We'll have actual machines here so that residents will be able to experience that process, and many of them may not have ever done that before. So I think that's going to be a great thing, which will be even more efficient for everybody.
And remember, since the vast majority of people here are not convicted of anything, they have all of their voting rights intact. There will be a small minority of people that are here serving their sentences post-conviction who will not be eligible, but the vast majority will be. So
yeah, and we're estimating about 700 voters for St. Louis County, and then others from St. Louis City. And if they are from St. Louis City, then those will be sent to St. Louis City. So everyone who's eligible will have an opportunity to vote. Iron workers and other unions affiliated with the Building Union Diversity Program will be coming in. Starting on May 27th, we'll have a group here to meet with residents on each floor, along with people with criminal histories that have established careers in those industries, and to talk about the process to become employed. And there's a big recruitment effort that'll be underway as well to make sure that people are prepared and ready to do that when they release. We also have had students from St. Louis University here on April 8th to conduct videos. This is the second time this has happened. This time they were interviewing residents involved in the Choices long-term residential drug treatment program. And that virtual career fair will be held on April 19th. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So it was just held on Tuesday, but now over the next, over the 72 hours since Tuesday, the employers are getting, about 68 employers are getting customized video reels that have videos of some of our detainees here, and then over 100 other people who have come out of federal and state probation and parole around the region, and are making selections about who they want to interview in person. So their volunteer job coaches will be in touch with our detainees as they release over the coming weeks to let them know who they can interview with.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great thing, and so that group will be releasing soon, and we appreciate those opportunities. So St. Louis University was also here to conduct their first class on reading and writing. That was held here April 8th, and there'll be classes ongoing, and the St. Louis Community College will be starting soon. We have established wireless internet now in the classrooms, and we also have had the tablets in place, so we're really expanding opportunities for education here in the facility. And we have several leadership development opportunities in place now. We have had a women's leadership program that started during Women's Leadership Month in March, and it was mentioned that we have had 3 new lieutenants that are promoted that are all female, and I would like to point out that our top 2 scorers both were female, and many of them have said that they weren't even applying in the past because they felt like their opportunities were limited. So I think that program is making a huge difference, and they'll be working together now to plan next steps, which will include some field trips to Delmar Divine and other locations. National Institute of Corrections has us at the top of their list when their travel ban is lifted to come here and provide leadership training for all staff. And on May 9th, we have a program for supervisors on coaching to improve performance, and that will be made available here for 25 supervisors. So we are already working on these recommendations that were made by CGL, and I've shared these with our entire management team, and I'll be sharing this with all staff so that we can begin this process to continue all the good things that are happening. And so I also wanted to share with you some strategies that were put in place to help with mental health, because estimates are that about 40% of people in jails and prisons now have a mental health need. Some may be undiagnosed, but there has been a long waiting list. You may have read about it in the Post-Dispatch articles that have been written recently, but we have worked with the Department of Mental Health to establish an agreement for them to bring a mobile unit here to St. Louis, to Department of Justice Services, to provide evaluation, treatment, and medication, including long-term injectables, which are very expensive, and there'll be no cost to St. Louis County. That will be fully funded by the State Department of Mental Health, and they also...
So long-term injectable, like Vivitrol, like stuff for, like medication-assisted
Well,
treatment, or like?
no, this is for mental health, and our medical unit can talk more about that when they give their update here, but if people have serious mental health issues, oftentimes they're not medicated, and they're not willing to take medication, and so if they take long-term injectables, then that can help them. So because of, and this extends beyond the pandemic, but of course during the pandemic, what happens when people with mental health issues are incarcerated, they tend to end up in segregation units.
Yeah.
And that just exacerbates their mental health condition and results in behavioral issues. And so we are working now, I've sent 2 staff to Nashville to look at their mental health unit. They actually have a unit there, and that's a best practice in the correctional system. And so we also have revised our intake process. So we're looking at, and we have made a request to Washington University and St. Louis University for social work practicum students to bring them into the jail. And until we are able to accomplish that, we will have a process now at intake where there's an initial screening so that they can be connected with places for people who comes into jail to provide mental health services, get an application for a public defender because there's often a delay in that process which delays the application to the state for evaluation if needed, and then ultimately connecting people with medication and services sooner. We do have a request for padded cells here, which has been requested nearly a year, probably over a year ago now at this point, but there's a delay in being able to get that done, but there is a need for that as well. So I see big changes ahead for us in terms of dealing, and I think you'll find in CGL's review that they will, in their final report, talk about how people with mental health need to be treated differently than others with just behavioral problems. And so we recognize that and want to thank Department of Public Health for all that they have been doing with this population as well, but it's not decreasing, it's just continuing to increase. So we have to address at a statewide level the delay in getting these evaluations done, and they have had a staff shortage as well, but recently have a pay increase, and I think Department of Mental Health is hoping that that will help on their end.
Well, good. One related positive thing is that I think it's likely that in the next couple months we will fill our open board seat with someone who has a subject matter expertise in mental health. So who could probably maybe ask better questions certainly than I can. So that's something for us to look forward to as a board.
Yeah, great, fantastic.
Any questions from anyone regarding those program updates?
No, just kudos to the director for all those reports and the positive work. And I know you've been trying to work with my university to get a student in. If I can do anything to help, I'd be to get that across the finish line. Let me know.
Thank you. And let me know if I'm around the flu.
Okay, great.
And I may be able to help with them, okay?
Okay, I'm letting you both know.
Okay. Okay. Do you have like a description?
Yes.
Okay, can you send me and Tim both the description?
Yeah, and they'll actually be supervised by Department of Public Health. Liz Allen, if she's on, may be able to talk about that, but.
Liz is at the beach.
Oh, okay.
Did you see her background?
No.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Hey, Beth, do you guys have a social work program?
Of course we do. I was just gonna say, I don't hear any UMSL in there.
Okay.
I would love to send, we also have obviously a master's and PhD in undergrad in criminal justice, so we would love to send some people your way.
Okay,
Okay,
fantastic.
why don't you just send the whole board that description and let us all kind of go to work, since pretty much all the area universities are represented here.
Hey,
right,
Jeff, I have to tease you. Of course, UMSL has a social work program and my wife works there. So
Okay. Sorry to
So if you send it to me, I'll send it to her, so.
Great.
Great. Okay, next up, the dashboard. Aaron, take it away.
Great. You guys hear me on these headphones? Just checking because these are new.
We can
Yep.
hear you.
Okay. All right. Let's share screen. Okay, so this, all right. Can we see the main dashboard here? All right, so this is a little bit different this month. What I'm showing here, assuming this is successfully shared on the screen, I just want to confirm that. You guys can see this from the boardroom?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. So this is what the new versions of the dashboard are going to look like. They are they're built in a different program, Tableau, but as you can see from the template, it looks more or less the same. I actually got the map in the middle working yesterday. So I have a meeting with the county data officer next week, and she should, if all goes well, she should thumbs up the final approval to put these make these public. So this should hopefully be viewable to everybody within the next week or so, fingers crossed. A couple things I did want to highlight, and then I'll hand it over to Liz. Our bookings and releases were both way up in March as compared to prior months. If you see in February, we had about 700 bookings and releases. And then in March, we had about 1,000 bookings and releases. This did not really affect the jail population because the relative number of bookings and releases in comparison to each other was about the same. But the frequency of bookings and releases, the churn in both of them went up quite a bit from February.
Hey, Aaron, can I interrupt?
Sure.
You're not showing the booking screen right now.
Right, so that's in the first, in the, these two. Can you see the mouse, Tim?
Yeah, but is that bookings?
Well, these are bookings and releases in the upper left and center.
Yeah,
No, they're not.
We're seeing medical.
We're seeing a medical dashboard, Aaron.
Oh.
That's what I meant, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I apologize. Let's, I think I know what happened. Let's see if I can figure out. So I think I'm gonna need to close the other three and then I'll have to open them up separately. So let me do that. Sorry about that, guys.
No problem.
If this works now. Does this show the main dashboard now?
Yes, it does.
Okay, there we
Yeah.
go, perfect.
Thank
Yeah, I
you. Yeah.
apologize about that. So I was trying to have all four of them available at once, so I could just click between them. So here you can see bookings and releases both went up quite a bit in March from February. Like I said, it didn't affect the overall jail population because the rate at which they went up was virtually identical. But I just wanted to bring this to everybody's notice because the churn that we're having in the ins and outs has increased in its pace. But the daily population has stayed pretty steady. In fact, as of this morning, we were at 855. So we've been in the mid to somewhat high 850s for quite a while now. So that's stable. I did want to highlight in on use of force. This month, use of force, it was up from last month, but it was overwhelmingly restraint chair oriented, as you can see in the green. So the overall rate was higher, but it was comprised overwhelmingly of the most mild particular type of use of force. As you can see, I've remade the map so that you can view this, you can zoom in. Sorry about that. So as this gets public in the next week or so, you'll be able to go in and look at these numbers yourself. This is comparable to the map in the prior version of the dashboard. But I actually think once I figured out finally how to get it to work, the Tableau version of the mapping software on the dashboard is very nice and intuitive, as you can hover over every zip code and it'll show you all the details of all the demographics.
I could do that for hours.
Yeah.
I know, right? It's addicting. Yeah.
I didn't think you could hear me.
Yeah. And so I think, and the other thing I wanted to mention is that we had a positive rebound in length of stay from February to March. in February, it had it had been up at 100 days. And in March, the length of stay for the released residents was down to 67 days. This is still higher than it was for a large part of 2020 and 2021, but it was a very significant reduction, which is good. Let me close this and go to the supplemental one. Sorry about having to do these individually. I didn't realize that it wouldn't like the changes. Share this.
The chat.
Oh, I don't know.
Oh.
All right, here's the supplemental dashboard. I think the only thing on here that I wanted to mention, and this is not a window that I usually spend much time presenting on, but it's interesting that we've actually seen a significant increase over the past 6 months in the average age of the female residents in the jail. It's a peculiar trend. I'm honestly not sure what's been causing it, but as you can see, the females only make up about 10% of the jail, so it's not a might be a little more than that. I'd have to look at the number, but it's not a significant proportion. You can see that the overall average age for the residents has jumped about over a year in the last 6 months. And that's primarily due to the average age of the female residents jumping from, well, the white females from about 35 to 40, and the black females from about 30 to 32 and a half. So I don't usually focus much time on that window because it's a little bit, the trends move slowly, and so there's not much of note from month to month, but I did want to highlight that because it's a little bit of an interesting change. This is the first time I've ever seen a subgroup with an overall average age over 40. Besides that, the only other thing I wanted to highlight was that the overtime hours for March were about 5,400. This is in line with where they've been the last 4 or 5 months. It is an increase from last month, which was 4,900. So
yeah, I mean, it looks, I mean, that, the general trend is in the right direction over the last 6 months or so.
For overtime hours?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as you can see, we've been bouncing up and down, but the 54-55 is lower than any of the numbers other than last month, in the last 7 or 8 months before that.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of what the leadership was hoping to accomplish when, 9 months ago or so, we really started making the push. How many months have you?
6.5.
You've been here, okay. Because I mean, that was like really the first thing that you did here was work on that. So, yeah, it's good to see that trending in the right direction. Thanks, Aaron.
Sure. And if anybody has any questions on the main dashboard, I can open that back up. After that, I'll pass it on to Liz and open up.
Okay, well, that's about when it started trending down 7 or 8 months ago. So.
Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
No, you go, Aaron.
I was just going to say I'm excited for the release of the new Tableau dashboards. It took a while to build them, and there's been some, back and forth between myself and the county data officer to make sure that they're compliant in various ways. But as I mentioned in the email this week, we've had serious issues with the prior program, the one that's currently in use, with data corruption. This is actually the 4th time we've had our data corrupted in about 6 months, which makes it very difficult. It makes it impossible for me to update some of the dashboard windows to make them up to date. So Tableau is a well-respected, top-of-the-line data visualization program. I don't expect any issues with data corruption, primarily because to use Tableau, we don't have to have the data sitting on a third-party server. So this should be a vast improvement. I've tried to keep the design of the dashboards as faithful to the original design as possible, and I think that has been fairly manageable to do. Any other questions for me before I pass it over to Liz?
Thanks, Aaron.
Okay, great. Let me unshare here. I will unshare this. Now I will open up Liz's dashboard. It doesn't seem to like having multiple Tableau windows open at once. So, all right, let's. So Liz, here's your dashboard. And as you can see, I've tried to keep this as faithful to the original layout as possible. So if you have any questions for me, please feel free to ask, and I can zoom in on any of the individual windows.
Aaron, could you zoom in on the open clinical positions?
Open clinical positions, sure.
So headed in the right direction the last 2 months.
Yes, this is the window that I currently have unavailable on the main dashboards, the current ones, because there was another data corruption problem.
You know what the source of the data corruption problem is? It the Russians or what?
I didn't bring my phone.
It's ArcGIS Online, in short, is not they do not invest quite a bit of resources into their dashboard.
Okay.
Take care, Tony.
I'll be right back.
Oh, you're coming.
Yeah.
So Liz, you are welcome to present now if you'd like.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Was there a question in regards to this?
We can't hear you very well.
Very quiet.
There was no question. Just an observation.
Just an observation, yeah.
And it is quite beach there.
Mm-hmm.
My first time seeing the dashboard.
Where is she?
I think she's in her office.
Scott, where have you been the last 2 years? Everybody does that. She's not really on the beach.
She wishes she was.
I was on the beach. I was in Hawaii at one.
Right?
Yeah.
You were
We're not-
lucky.
Actually,
We're not able to hear Liz very well.
She's working on it there.
Liz, you want to try again?
Maybe Ray will run down
I
there.
actually think she might be coming down to the boardroom right now. I'm not sure,
Okay.
but yeah. and she
Oh,
might
here
be-
she comes. All the way from the beach.
I was getting excited that she was-
Are you on the Concord, Liz?
Since when does St. Louis have a beach? I didn't know St. Louis had
I
a
think
beach.
I had a great view from his apartment and it was the background.
Yeah, right. Some of them are really good.
You guys like the look of the new Tableau dashboards? Just curious.
Here she comes.
Okay.
Hi, straight from the beach.
Yes, I'm directly from Bermuda. And Bermuda is my happy place, just so you're aware. This is my first time seeing the report as far as in this format. As far as I know, I don't have increases in any statistical data that has been reported as far as outlying statistics.
The safety event seems to have risen some in the last month.
Safety events have always, I want to continue to increase the reporting of safety events. I had an all-staff meeting yesterday. I said, if the staff doesn't report concerns that they have or errors that they see or things that they've caught, then we can't change our systems in order to continuously address any system errors that we may have, providing education and training to staff. Yes, it did go up from last month, but that's something that we're always.
You believe it's a function of increased reporting as opposed to increased incidents, is what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. Well,
in the healthcare field, you will always have safety events, whether we've caught them, whether it's something that happened. What you strive for is no harm to patients, but you will always have, because you have human beings working within a system, you're going to have issues and concerns.
Well, just based on the lack of increases in the other areas, your explanation would seem to make sense.
Okay. I concur. Thank you. So, Erin, I don't know what my other screens show.
Do you mean the second dashboard?
Yeah, the second dashboard, I think, is just statistical demographics about actual physical care.
I did not see any substantial changes in those metrics.
Okay. I can give you a COVID update. We are close to administering 20,000 COVID tests, and we are still under 500 positives, and we currently have 1 positive in the facility at this particular moment in time. So we still continue to deal with COVID on a regular basis and try to keep it from the facility.
Thank you, Liz. I just wanted to add, for the benefit of members of the board, the current situation with COVID in terms of community transmission is rebounding upwards because of the BA.2 variants and subvariants. And so they are far more efficiently transmitted than the Omicron variant or its BA.1 variant, which means that we're likely to see an increase in cases with milder symptoms or no symptoms. And for a place like the jail, it does pose a threat in that we are likely to see more cases. That will not result in symptoms or any medical interventions required necessarily, but we should be mentally prepared to see that. The relaxation of precautionary measures in the wider community, such as the wearing of masks, etc., is also an additional risk for any correctional setting or any jail type setting. So please keep that in mind. We've gotten through the worst of it, but we're not out of the pandemic just yet. Thanks.
If I can comment, could I comment, Jeff?
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Khan. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Khan, and thank you, Liz. And you know, I'm going to use this slot to do my usual thing, which is to applaud the work of the health department, the health staff that are in the jail and the health department, because these COVID rates and the ability that in the vaccinations are doing are actually really good. And I share Dr. Khan's concerns because I sit on the St. Louis City Board of Health, and we saw some uptick. I mean, generally the numbers are looking pretty good, but I think there's some rise, as Dr. Khan mentioned. So, but in general, I just want to applaud the jail for staff for what they're doing to do this. And if we could compute a rate, I'm sure the rate would look actually in general better than the rest of the community.
I think that's right. All right. Any other questions on the dashboard, on the medicine dashboard? All right. Thank you, Dr. Khan. Thank you very much, Liz. Good to see you.
Calling from the beach.
Any public comment this month, Penny?
No, there were none.
Okay, no public comments. We will plan for the next board meeting.
May 27th.
Yeah, May 27th.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony. And no other business pending before the board. I move that we adjourn. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. The ayes appear to have it, and we are adjourned. Have a good weekend, everyone. Enjoy the warm weather.